Welcome, dear dreamer, to Sleepy Tales of the World. Here, every story is told softly, like a gentle lullaby for your mind. Each tale is designed to help you relax, to let go of the day, and drift peacefully into sleep. Tonight, we travel to a lonely island in the San Francisco Bay, a place once thought to be unescapable. This is the calm and mysterious sleep story of Alcatraz, the prison on the rock, and the dream of freedom that once slipped quietly into the night. So close your eyes, breathe slowly, and let this story carry you toward rest. Chapter 1. The Island of Alcatraz. Alcatraz is an island unlike any other. Rising from the cold waters of the San Francisco Bay, it sits just 1.25 miles offshore, close enough to see the city's lights, yet far enough to feel like another world. The island is small, only about 22 acres, but its cliffs, sharp rocks, and restless waves gave it an air of isolation. The locals once called it La Isla de los Alcatraces, the island of the pelicans. For years, seabirds circled its skies, resting along its windswept cliffs. Later, the island became a military fort, then a military prison, and finally, in 1934, a federal penitentiary. Alcatraz was built to be escape-proof. High walls, cold steel bars, armed guards, and searchlights that swept across the night. And even if someone could break free of the prison itself, the icy currents of the bay waited beyond. The water was unforgiving, its tides pulling outward toward the ocean. The city of San Francisco shimmered in the distance, but for those locked inside, it might as well have been a dream. From the shore, the prison rose like a fortress. Rows of narrow windows stared outward, like watchful eyes in the stone. At night, the sound of waves echoed through the empty corridors, and the cries of seagulls blended with the hum of the wind. For those imprisoned there, life was strict, cold, and predictable. But for some, the dream of freedom was never silenced, and that dream, whispered in the quiet, would someday take shape as the most famous escape attempt the island had ever seen. Chapter 2. Life inside the prison. Life on Alcatraz was unlike any other prison in America. For the men who lived there, days were marked by strict rules and endless repetition. The prison was built not only to contain, but to control. Each morning, the inmates were awakened by the clang of metal doors. The sound echoed through the long cell blocks, a sharp reminder of where they were. The cells themselves were small, just 5 feet wide and 9 feet long, enough space for a bed, a sink, and a toilet. The walls were painted a dull, pale green, a color chosen not for beauty, but for control. The air was damp, and in the winter months, the chill from the bay crept inside. After roll call, the men were marched to breakfast. Meals were simple, but filling. Oatmeal, bread, eggs, coffee. Food at Alcatraz was said to be better than at most prisons, because the officials believed that hunger led to trouble. Still, the silence was strict. Conversation was limited. Every action, every movement was watched. When breakfast ended, work began. Some men labored in the laundry rooms, washing endless piles of clothing. Others worked in the kitchen, or repaired shoes, or kept the prison itself in order. The clatter of tools, the smell of soap, the scrape of mops against the floor, these became the soundtrack of their days. In rare free hours, inmates could go to the recreation yard. From there, they could see the skyline of San Francisco. The city seemed so close, just across the shimmering waters. At night, the faint sound of music drifted across the bay, a reminder of dances, parties, and lives that continued beyond their reach. For many prisoners, this was the hardest punishment of all, to be so near to freedom, yet trapped by walls, water, and time. Books were a comfort. The prison library held thousands of volumes, and men spent long hours reading. Some studied law, others escaped into fiction, their imaginations carrying them far beyond the island. But still, the weight of monotony pressed down. Each day was nearly the same as the one before. For some men, the repetition dulled their spirit. For others, it sharpened their desire to escape. Because while Alcatraz was meant to break hope, hope has a way of surviving, even in the coldest places. And in the quiet of the cells, plans began to form. Plans that would one day test the limits of the island itself. Among the many men who passed through Alcatraz, a few carried with them not only patience, but persistence. They studied their surroundings, measured each detail, and waited for the right moment. In the late 1950s and early 1960s, 3 men quietly began shaping the most daring escape the island had ever seen. Their names were Frank Morris and the brothers Clarence and John Anglin. Frank Morris had a reputation for intelligence. He had grown up moving from foster home to foster home, and by the time he was a teenager, he had already been in and out of prisons. But he was resourceful. In tests of problem solving, his scores placed him among the top 2% of inmates. He was quiet, focused, and determined. The Anglin brothers, Clarence and John, had grown up in Georgia, working the fields with their family. They were skilled with their hands, craftsmen who could build, repair, and create. And like Frank, they had found themselves behind bars. By chance, all 3 men ended up on Alcatraz. The plan they formed was not reckless. It was patient, delicate, and detailed. By day, they worked their assigned jobs, but by night, in the stillness of their cells, they began their quiet project. Using simple tools, spoons stolen from the mess hall, and bits of metal smuggled from the workshop, they began to dig. Behind the air vents of their cells, they slowly chipped away at the concrete walls. The work was careful and hidden. Each night, they loosened the plaster. Each morning, they concealed their progress with a cardboard grate, painted to match the walls. As weeks passed, the holes grew larger. One by one, the men were able to squeeze through into an unused utility corridor, a hidden space that stretched behind the cell block. But that was only the beginning. They also needed a way off the island, and for that, they turned to creativity. From prison raincoats, they stitched together a raft and life vests. Over 50 coats were collected, carefully cut apart, and glued using heat from the steam pipes. Slowly, what had once been clothing became a vessel of possibility. To keep the guards from noticing their absence, the men crafted dummy heads. They shaped them from soap, toilet paper, and real hair collected from the prison barbershop. In the dim light of night, the dummies looked real enough to fool the watchful eyes of the guards. The plan was bold, but it was also quiet, crafted not with chaos, but with patience. And as the days slipped by, their dream of freedom drew closer. The island, once thought unescapable, was slowly being outsmarted by men with determination, ingenuity, and the unshakable hope of life beyond the bars. Chapter 4. The Night of the Escape. The night was quiet on Alcatraz. It was June 11th, 1962. The bay waters rolled gently against the rocks. The city lights of San Francisco flickered in the distance, just as they always did. A reminder of freedom, so close, yet so far away. Inside the prison, most men slept in their cells. The guards walked their usual rounds, their footsteps echoing in the dim corridors. But in 3 small cells along the row, something unusual was unfolding. Frank Morris and Clarence and John Anglin had been preparing for this moment for months. Tonight was the night their plan would finally be tested. Each man lay in his bunk, his head resting on a pillow. But these were not ordinary heads. They were the carefully crafted dummies, painted faces, stuffed with hair, resting on blankets shaped like bodies. In the dim glow of the prison night, they looked real enough to pass. Slowly, silently, the 3 men crawled through the holes they had dug behind their vents. The concrete edges scratched against their clothing, but they moved with patience, with care. Beyond the walls, they slipped into the utility corridor, a hidden passage of pipes and shadows. They climbed upward, hand over hand, moving toward the roof. The prison was still, the only sound the distant hum of the bay wind. Reaching the roof, they paused. Below them, Alcatraz stretched like a fortress of stone and steel. Beyond it, the black water shimmered in the moonlight. They made their way across the rooftop and down a drainage pipe to the ground. There, hidden near the shoreline, they had stored the final piece of their plan. The raft and vests, stitched together from raincoats. Carefully, they carried the materials to the edge of the island. The waves splashed softly against the rocks. The air was cold, the water colder still. With steady hands, they inflated the raft. The fabric stretched, the seams held. It was their fragile hope, their bridge to freedom. One by one, they climbed aboard. The raft shifted, rocked by the tide, but it held. And then, with quiet strokes of makeshift paddles, they pushed away from the island. The prison lights glowed behind them, watchtowers standing tall, but unseen. Ahead, the city shimmered like a dream. The raft drifted into the dark, carried by the waters of the bay. And just like that, the men vanished into the night. By morning, their cells appeared untouched. The dummy heads still rested on the pillows, their painted faces staring blankly at the bars. It was only when the guards tried to wake them that the truth was revealed. 3 men were gone. Chapter 5. The Legacy of Mystery. Morning came softly to the island. The fog lifted over the water, and the first rays of sunlight touched the prison walls. When the guards moved through the rows of cells, they called for the men to rise. But in 3 cells, something was wrong. The bodies on the bunks did not stir. The faces that looked back were lifeless, painted, silent. The guards pulled back the blankets and discovered the deception. Frank Morris, Clarence Anglin, and John Anglin were gone. The alarm spread quickly. Searchlights swept the bay. Boats circled the waters. Helicopters scanned the shoreline. But no trace was found. Only the empty cells, the holes in the walls, and the fragile raft, now missing. The FBI investigated for years. They studied the tides, measured the currents, and searched for any sign of the men. Some believed the icy waters of the bay claimed them, pulling them beneath the surface. Others believed they reached the shore, vanished into the world, and began new lives in secret. Over the decades, rumors surfaced, sightings were reported, letters appeared, stories whispered of men who had survived, but nothing was ever proven. And so, the escape from Alcatraz remains a mystery, a puzzle left unsolved. 3 men who may have drowned in the dark waters, or may have seen the lights of San Francisco not as a dream, but as a beginning. Today, Alcatraz stands as a monument to history. The prison closed in 1963, just a year after the escape. Now it is a place of tours and stories, where visitors walk the halls, listen to the echoes of the past, and look across the bay, wondering if freedom was truly reached that night. The island is quiet now. The seagulls still circle, the waves still brush against the rocks, and the city still shimmers just beyond. And somewhere in the silence, the mystery of that night drifts on, like a whisper carried by the tide. As you close your eyes, let this story rest within you. Let it remind you that even in the strongest walls, hope can find a way. And like the waves of the bay, your thoughts can drift softly now, further and further into the gentle sea of sleep.